Hi, this is Graphically Alex coming at you with all things fat related. If that's something that interests you, please subscribe. I'd love to have you. Today we're going to cover this video. I was suggested it by one of you guys in the comments, and I died at the title. So I was like, we're gonna have to do this. That's too good. So I don't have any context with Legia at all. I just want you to know that. And we're not political on this channel. So I'm not going to be commenting on anything like overtly political, but we're going to stick to the fat acceptance. We're going to stick to obesity and the toxic ritualistic, all that type of stuff, which is what I call you fall by the letter D on this channel. I call it the toxic ritualistic. So we're going to just stay on track, period. But we're going to see how she's working in the fat acceptance into the politics, and I'll comment on that. Okay? So let's go ahead and get started.
25. Welcome to Why America? I'm Legia Miller. I don't know about you, but my For You page has been dominated by discussions about the rise in popularity of extreme thinness, perpetuated partially by the current press tour for the second installment of the Wicked franchise. Many people have noted the extreme change in body fat percentages of the cast members, specifically Ariana Grande, Cynthia Erivo, and Michelle Yeoh, all of whom appeared on red carpets recently looking especially gaunt. This has sparked a larger conversation about how extreme thinness is actually reinforced and perpetuated by fascism, and that it is no coincidence that thin is once again in now that we have a fascist regime controlling the government. But is that true? Is there really a massive government conspiracy to keep women thin and hungry so that we can't fight back when the revolution comes? Commentary about bodies online tends to trend towards black and white thinking, and I think that is also happening here. It also tends to ignite a firestorm of back and forth, of debate, in a way that few other subjects online tend to do. I made one offhanded single sentence.
So I'm interested in how this is going to go because she's already championing one of the fat acceptance principles, which is essentially that the media causes, like, the people follow the media, which I don't agree with that. I think that that is a fat acceptance thing where because somebody in media looks a certain way, that means that we have to look a certain way. I think it's the other way. In my opinion, I think it's flipped. So it tends to be the demand of the people shift the media rather than the media shifting the demand. That's my opinion. I differ from fat acceptance when it comes to that idea. She is agreeing with fat acceptance there. So I just want to point out that's an area where I'm already disagreeing. But let's see.
Comment in a video a couple weeks ago about how I don't like diet culture because I think there are better things to be doing than starving yourself, and y'all had more to say about that single line than about the entire rest of the video, and there's a lot to unpack there, which we'll get into. So I wanted to get to the bottom of this.
Okay, so on this channel I define diet culture a little bit differently. I'm trying to take it back. I'm trying to take back the words because I think it's important to have something to describe what it is, or what I describe it as, which is essentially diet culture foods are essentially foods that are had either to reduce overall calorie intake or to increase protein for less calories, essentially. And that's basically it. So like a protein shake would be considered diet culture to me, or a fat-free whipped cream would be considered diet culture, things like that. Cottage cheese, especially fat-free cottage cheese, is diet culture-y. So that's kind of how I use it. It usually is within the context of a vanity weight loss era. So a person who is either maybe mid-size at most or vanity weight levels, who's trying to really reduce how much they're, taking in so that they can get to a certain goal. Particularly if you're going below what your overall maintenance would be for, your goal weight, basically. And then that's especially diet culture-y. So if you're actually going beneath what you would stay at for life, so to speak, that's super diet culture, basically. And that's more of a vanity weight loss era, which just means it's usually less necessary, or it's more about aesthetics and things like that, which is completely fine as long as it's done healthfully. And as long as it's not, in my opinion, as long as it's not over glorified or it's not acting like people don't act like it's not difficult and things like that. I have a lot of issues with the way that even fitness influencers will talk about this type of stuff. That being said, not a huge fan of fat acceptance takes. She's probably thinking of the fat acceptance definition of diet culture, which is essentially any reduction whatsoever. Anything in how much a person is consuming. So that would be her definition likely, but I'm trying to take it back because I think we need to describe that. But then we also need to, I take back their words. I take back fat acceptance words. I do. I took back mid-size. I took back small fat. I took back, these things, super fat, etc. And I used it to describe these different social categories. So no, I'm not going to let them steal what diet culture is. Or, if it's a good term that's used, then I'm going to use it. And I'm going to change it. I'm going to do my best to change it. So let's continue
this discussion and figure out correlation versus causation, cause and effect. Are we all getting more obsessed with thinness because of the fascist takeover in the White House? This headline from CNN caught my eye. Cynthia Erivo shields Ariana Grande from barrier jumping fan. It is this.
Okay, sorry about that. So I want to just say, I want to push back on this because this really started. There's been quite a lot of things that have happened, but I think it has less to do with who's president. It has more to do with the panini. The panini was a major turning point in America. It hit the U.S. particularly hard. It was very, very rough during that time. That's basically all I'm going to say about it. I don't want to get into detail. But after that, I will say too, fat acceptance activists were absolutely atrocious during 2020. They were awful with how they talked about things. Their messaging was really gross. And I think the combination of TikTok combined with fat activism, combined with the panini, it created this like weird thing where then after that in 2021, which again, we had a different president at the time, you have anti-fat acceptance YouTubers really starting to blow up or take off. And there was commentary about it, particularly a lot of voices that were speaking out against, oh my gosh, I forgot her name for a second. Marissa Matthews and like Splotchmaker, and just like off the top of my head, which I don't even think Splotchmaker is doing it anymore, but there were a lot of people that were involved in fat acceptance that were being talked about quite often. I remember watching Sam at Every Size. I watched this one channel, I think it was called like Fundy Times or something like that. I watched, obviously Michelle McDaniel. She's been talking about it for a very long time. There was, just a lot of people that were actually speaking out against it. And I was shocked by some of the takes because it really put a spotlight on it in a way that I think was negative. And that really just continued. It continued to fester. People started joining in anti-fat acceptance content online, people all across the political spectrum. And it really started to blow up, basically. And by the time we reached 2022, Taylor Swift had her moment with the scale. That was really bad for fat acceptance. It brought a lot of things to attention. It pissed off all the Swifties. And it started a whole cascade to the point where I was like, oh, I need to speak up. And I decided to do this as my activistic cause around that time, around the time of the scale incident with Taylor. Which, I did troll the Swifties at the time, but I was a bitch in 2022. I don't know what to tell you. The point is, I really started being serious about my activism in 2023, and I noticed that things started to shift that year. So that's way before we have a different president. That's way before, is all I'm trying to say. That was 2023. Ozempic was really starting to be talked about a lot. And that was a huge shift. And also, I'm going to just say I started my activism. So I'm going to say I was a part of it. But also other people started too. I mean, it just kind of kept growing basically in 2023. It really was established. There was more of an anti-fat acceptance movement by 2023. A lot of different voices were speaking up. A lot of people were criticizing these takes, and that just continued on until we get to 2024, which the Leo Skepi incident, I've realized that is when normal people were basically done with fat acceptance. So between the Ozempic, the Panini, the voices online speaking against fat acceptance of, again, all across the political aisle, you have all of this coming together into this perfect storm. And then fat activists jumped the shark with Leo Skepi, where he said something pretty reasonable about clothing. And he used his height as an example because he's very tall. And he said, like, just if they're not providing clothes for you, then don't buy them, basically, or don't buy their clothes. Buy what's for you. And that created a huge cancellation. And that was pretty much the last time they had any sway. And ever since then, it's just gone down and down and down in popularity. And that's way before we have a new president, or that's way before the president shifts. That's way before all of that. So it doesn't really have to do with who's in office. I think that this would be continuing on regardless of who had won last year. This was a trend that I see happening all across the political spectrum. It's probably one of the few uniting issues that exist, which, I mean, it is an extremely important issue. Obviously, I only focus on this issue, so obviously I'm going to sit here and say that it's the most important issue because to me it is. But we still are at a calamitous level of obesity in the United States, but it is slowing or steadying. And I'm super fascinated to see what the statistics show for next year, as in 2024, I was super morbidly obese, and I was a part of that statistic. In 2025, I was obese, and I'm part of that statistic. Now that's no longer true. So for 2026, I would be normal weight. So I'm interested to see what's been going on. And I have a little bit of hope, actually, about this, because I thought that they would be able to fight back better, and they haven't. But this is an attempt for fat, again, I don't think she's a fat activist, but it's an attempt. They've at least taught her certain things, and she's trying to push that forward, or she believes it herself. Regardless, that doesn't really matter. The point is, she's trying, but again, that's a long ways away. There were articles talking about how it was over basically from the beginning of the year, from January, from right in the beginning. And then even articles from late last year. I've been reading them. I read them on the channel. I pay attention to written media within fat acceptance because I want to see what especially journalists are saying about it, because they tend to lead the crowd. And right now they're glorifying how things used to be, but they're also not really saying much of anything, at least within U.S. media. It's basically dead. And that says a lot too. So anyways, let's continue.
This video that has helped to spark the discussions about thinness and fascism online. Using the Ground News browser extension, I can see that in the US, CNN is considered left-leaning. To get the big picture, I can click on full coverage, which will show me coverage of the same story from publications across the political spectrum. My partner on today's video, Ground News, uses 3 independent
Okay, 1 second. Okay, we are back. 1 second.
Let me take a step back to quickly define fascism, because it is a term that has been thrown around a lot lately, I think for good reason, but people tend to dismiss it as just an epithet that doesn't mean anything anymore because we use it as a label for everything. And the reality is that fascism is hard to define. It doesn't fit into a box like other isms tend to do, and it is entirely dependent on the state in which it arises. Robert Paxton's book, The Anatomy of Fascism, helps to give us a kind of definition. Under Paxton's interpretation, fascism is a mass anti-liberal anti-liberal, anti-communist movement, radical in its willingness to employ force, where nationhood and membership in a dominant class is put above all else, and where national unity and distinction from a class of deplorable others is reinforced by the state. And by anti-liberal, he didn't mean liberals like we use the term in modern United States, like liberals versus conservatives. He meant the term like liberalism to mean liberal economics, the idea of unrestricted free trade, a la neoliberalism, or what some might call globalism today. So an anti-liberal, anti-communist, pro-nationalist movement that revolves around membership to a prescribed group, and anyone outside that group is seen as a threat, as others in need of elimination in one way or another. The unique thing about fascism is that it matters where it develops, because 1930s Germany was far more susceptible to the argument in favor of putting the nation above the individual, whereas 2020's United States, fascism is wielded by appealing to the rugged individualism that is so ingrained in US culture. But the pieces are all there. There's the tariffs to reinforce protectionism and bring back manufacturing and fight against globalization. There's the radical willingness to use force exhibited.
Like I said, I'm not going to comment on any of this. I'm just going to get to the fat acceptance aspects
on January 6th.
So I'm interested to see how she's going to link this to thinness.
2021 and perpetuated in our streets every day now by a growing Gestapo made up of untrained, militarized, masked men who kidnap people off the streets as our government cheers. And those people being taken, the immigrants, the others, seen as such a threat to the nation, to the sense of nationhood that they claim is being eroded by our open borders, are being constantly vilified and stereotyped in seemingly never-ending...
So this happens on either side of the political spectrum. I don't want to throw any shade or whatever towards any one group. I've seen right-wingers do this too, where when they talk about fatness, they'll do anything to talk about. They'll do anything but talk about it. So that's kind of what she's doing right now. I understand she's a political pundit. She's going to get in her talking points and do what she needs to do. It'd be the same thing on the right. It'd be the same thing anywhere else. So I understand that's her primary focus. And like I said, we're not going to comment on that. But I'm still waiting for the topic of fatness to come up. So let's see.
Propaganda pumped out by the government. The pieces are all there. Robert Paxton himself, after January 6th, determined that Trump's regime can rightfully be called fascist, okay? So it's important to take a moment to acknowledge that it is not an overstatement to call Trump a fascist or his regime fascist. Leading scholars of fascism use the term to describe this regime. We are not being hyperbolic when we are saying that we are living under an increasingly fascist regime, okay? And it is true that historically, fascist regimes like Hitler's, like Mussolini's, placed a lot of emphasis on bodies, on the physical human form as a symbol of nationhood. Arno Breker was Hitler's favorite sculptor, and he helped create the mythology.
Okay. So this is already kind of a bad argument. Just because a fascist likes something doesn't mean that somebody that likes the same thing is a fascist. So this is a reach already. But okay, this is not going well so far.
Of the Aryan race in Nazi Germany. Perfectly proportioned, lean, muscular male figures and slender, athletic women. The agile, athletic body ideal was directly tied in Nazi propaganda with the strength and health of the nation, which was a really enticing image in a country that was struggling to regain its strength after World War I. The first president of the Weimar Republic in Germany between World War I and the rise of Hitler, Friedrich Ebert, was photographed in a bathing suit next to Defense Minister Gustav Noske, and the two were openly mocked for years afterwards because of how unfit they both looked. The public seeing this as a metaphor for the weak and flabby state of the government of Germany after the First World War. Of course, Hitler himself wasn't exactly the model of perfect athletic Aryan beauty, but we've all seen Trump in his golfing whites. That doesn't really seem to matter. As Robert Paxton told the New York Times, quote, "Focusing on leaders," Paxton has long held, "is a distraction when trying to understand fascism. What you ought to be studying is the milieu out of which they grew," Paxton said. "For fascism to take root, there needs to be an opening in the political system, which is the loss of traction by the traditional parties," he said. "There needs to be a real breakdown. Fascist movements succeed," Paxton wrote, "in environments in which liberal democracy stood accused of producing divisions and decline. And that was true in post-World War I Germany, and it sure as hell is true today in the United States, where income inequality is at an all-time high, and people are going bankrupt just trying to pay for housing, food, education, childcare, and medical bills, the basics to keep themselves alive. The MAGA movement has capitalized on this desperation and directed it into hatred for their chosen other, immigrants. And much like the current milieu in the United States is ripe for fascism, it's also ripe for the re-emergence of the heroin chic aesthetic. But the thesis that I would like to present
so we getting to it
to you today is that while I think it serves the fascist agenda, I think that this is merely a happy coincidence for the fascists and not the result of some vast fascist conspiracy. Because it turns out we've been policing bodies and weight for a long, long time, and that policing serves not to uphold fascism, but instead to uphold the various ideologies that happen to serve fascism, like eugenics, the patriarchy, and neoliberalism.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Yeah, she's starting to lose it. So here we go. It's coming in. So weight loss is eugenics. That's not true at all. That's crazy. Again, just because a fascist likes something doesn't mean that somebody who likes the same thing is also a fascist, or that what they like is fascistic. I hate to use this argument because it's used so often and it's kind of cringe, but Hitler also liked dogs. That doesn't mean that owning a dog is fascist. You need something more. You need something more. You need more of a connection. And within the toxic ritualistic, people that are on the hinge side, so people that are doing too much, we will just say, people who tend to be getting bigger, okay, over time, people on that side of the spectrum, they tend to have to justify their actions. So why does that happen? Because they show very obviously. Part of the toxic ritualistic is the fact that it shows on you, especially within BINGE or hinge. If you're on that side of the spectrum, you will be bigger. You might be bigger really quickly or seemingly unexplainedly, especially if you're like, I don't know, I don't eat that much. I don't know why I'm this big, right? That's a warning sign, especially if you see drastic fluctuations in a person or any of these things. It has to be justified. And if somebody is super morbidly obese because of their behaviors, which is typically the case, but it typically has to be pretty severe to maintain super morbid obesity. You either have to have an extreme amount of pathology and or trauma or physical issues, which gaining weight will eventually lead to physical issues that then reinforce that size and can increase appetite and all these types of things. Regardless, a person that is very big, that has the toxic ritualistic, will need to justify why they are big. So you'll see people on the hinge side of the spectrum using political and or religious arguments all the time. So somebody will take their politics or religion and then sway in their toxic ritualistic ideas into it to explain why they are bigger. So you can see it. It used to be more so on the right back in the 2000s, and it was kind of like the, quote unquote libertarian right. The government is exaggerating the issue of obesity. I want to eat as much as I want. I want to, it's like you want to have the big steaks, the big car, and, all that stuff. That type of idea was very big in the 2000s on the right. And so part of that was having your beer and eating a lot, basically. I don't know what else to say. Eating too much. So it's like, I'm not going to let the government tell me what to do. That was more of a right-wing thing. I've also talked about Christian ideas of why it's better to be bigger. Things like if I was of a normal weight, then I would hoe out. Or I don't trust myself. I don't trust my values. I don't trust myself to be moral if I were to be thin. These are very twisted ideas. Again, they're not actually a part of the religion or political perspective at all. They are a DIS order. They're unrelated. But you can see that she's doing that within a left-wing belief system. So being big is fighting the patriarchy. Being big is fighting fascism, right? So it's still that same justification, but it's just as fake. It's not related at all. It's not real. And that can be really difficult where people listen and they're like, oh, but people, they are constantly justifying their size. And that can happen at severe levels. You can be very, very big and have that going on, or it can even be at a more mild level. So it could just be like somebody saying, I don't care. Like she has her shirt says women don't owe you shit. So she could be saying like, I'm going to be bigger because I as a woman don't owe you anything. That's a little bit more of what I would call a mid-sized princess type of line of logic. But it's a less severe version of it. But in my opinion, there are really two levels of severity. There's a more mild version, which is kind of like somebody is engaging in the toxic ritualistic in order to fill in their time or in order to take up space in their mind so they don't have to think about it and about other things, whether that's they're just working too much or something like that. So it's a way to keep their mind busy. And that will happen a lot with people that have like ADHD and stuff like that. When it's more severe, then it becomes a coping mechanism for literally everything and anything. It takes up your entire identity and you can't even think without it. You can't have a single thought that doesn't go back to it. It takes over every aspect of your life. So that would be people who have been through various types of trauma, people who are very, very big, people who, like I said, they can't even fathom not thinking about it. These are people who stare at the mirror for hours a day. And I'm not even kidding you, like hours a day. So there are different levels to it, but a person will still use their politics as a part of it. It weaves in. So it would be like a more mild version is, well, I'm a woman and I'm a feminist and I don't owe you anything. I don't owe you to be thin. Well, that's more mild. If it was like, I have to be big in order to fight fascism, that's worse. That's a bigger stretch. You see how it's less realistic? It doesn't have anything to do with reality. You can kind of like halfway pretend that the less severe version makes sense, but it still doesn't. But when you're saying that being big is somehow fighting fascism, that is so far from reality that it's, in my opinion, severe. It's severely delusional. Like you are very delusional within this problem, whether it's mild or not, or severe, you're delusional. It is not real. You are believing in something that isn't true.
And listen, I can already picture the comments section. Some of you may think it's really not all that deep.
See, and she has to try to justify. So 1 second, we'll be right back. Okay.
I went unwillingly into the bowels of Reddit to understand some of this health-based body policing ideology, and I found myself in a subreddit called Fat Logic, which, as far as I can tell, is a community of 35,000 weekly visitors who see themselves as healthy or aspiring to be healthy and promoting health, and feel that they are diametrically opposed to what they call FAs, or fat activists, who are engaged in, quote, lengthy diatribes about how everything is society's fault. According to the page's About section, quote, falling victim to fat logic means accepting misinformation that will harm efforts to keep your body at a healthy weight or lose weight if you need to do so. There is so much to unpack about this, but I noted
fact. Very true.
Some common objections that these health warriors had to so-called fat activists, equating thinness with fascism, because I have seen these same ideas swirling all over the place online, including in my own comment section. Those objections include that it's not that deep. Not everything has to be political. Though I feel like if you're watching my content, you probably already understand that nothing happens in a vacuum.
People will use, a political pundit will use it, whether they believe in it or not. In my opinion, just from looking at her, which it's not like I can really tell, I don't know enough about her. At her size and the way that she's talking, I would consider her to be probably less severe, probably more mild. Maybe she's stressed and so she overeats. And maybe she is concerned about how she looks, but not all the time. Maybe she has an episode where she overeats too much, but it's once a week. You see, or maybe it's subclinical. So maybe it's once every 2 weeks, right? It could be something like that. But if she truly believes that it's healthy to be overweight, there's something wrong. Like there's something going on. She's either been lied to, which that can happen, or she is within the toxic ritualistic and she's probably just more at a milder level, which does exist. And people do forget that it can be more mild. And people also forget that it can also be subclinical. So you might not fully have it, but you're close to having it. It depends on how often you hinge. It's really about once a week for at least 3 months. So if you're doing that, then you have it. It just might be a more mild level. If it gets severe, then it can be daily. It can be daily for months at a time. Then you typically take spells where you stop, or you have spells where you become more reductive, and then in order to go back to the cycle, basically, at a later time. But severe, you're usually always on a diet of some type, staring at the mirror or hinging. And you'll have spells. And then in between spells, then you'll be overeating, typically, which they're two different things. So, yeah, the reason why I say she might have something, it depends, unless if this is deeply performative. But I don't necessarily see this as performative. If she does believe that it's healthy to be overweight, then she's lost touch with reality. There's something wrong. And then the justification and the weaving of politics in there, it's not a good sign. Something's off when you do that. It doesn't reflect well upon you. Like it does seem like there's a problem, regardless of what those politics are, regardless of anything. It doesn't make sense. There really is no political, religious, moral, realistic, practical reason to be overweight. It doesn't exist. You have to create it out of thin air. And if you must do that, if your answer is not, I'm lazy, or I overeat, or I just eat too much, or I have XYZ hormonal issue that I just am too lazy to take care of, okay, then you might have some TR going on. There might be a mental illness going on if you're doing that and you're not able to just say, I'm lazy. I didn't do it. I'm not taking care of myself. If you say that, I overindulge too often. Okay, that's somebody who's still in reality. But if it's, I'm trying to fight fascism, so I'm going to be bigger. You have that's the sign of a mental illness. I'm just letting you know.
Vacuum, and everything is political if you just take a second to rub two brain cells together and think about it. That's not to say that everything is a conspiracy, but everything exists.
Pathology is not political. Pathology is just a problem, and that's a fact.
Society, and the way that we think and feel about ourselves and our bodies is absolutely influenced by the society we exist in. To pretend otherwise is willfully ignorant. Okay, and then a lot of the other arguments that they had,
but it can be also influenced by people that have toxic ritualistic issues, because people often externalize those problems and try to reinforce them in other people, particularly if they also have the problem. People can sniff it out. You can look at everybody in the room and you'll see that person's toxic ritualistic. I'm going to talk to them. I'm going to reinforce it in them because they'll reinforce it in me because I want to hold on to the coping mechanism. So yes, there is a societal aspect, but it's not exactly in the way that she's making it out to be. It's not like everybody feels some kind of way about their body all the time because Ariana Grande was on the TV. It just doesn't happen that way. What it is that there's something wrong. It could be that you're too bored. ADHD, I think, is it can be easy to get to a mild level just from extreme levels of boredom. It is triggering. Or it can be something like a way to cope with excess stress, even at a mild level. So if it's like, well, I'm going to just start going on a weekly diet and then I'm going to just go overboard every single week, like that could be a milder form of the toxic ritualistic. especially if you're doing it over and over and over again. It's like, you have to consider if you're doing something like that, what are you actually doing? What's going on? It might not be severe, may even be subclinical, but it's still a problem. If it's worse, if you can't even fathom not doing it, then there's a real issue and you need to treat it immediately. You need to start fighting it immediately because it's not going to just go away. It never really does just go away, but you can stop it. And it's always better to stop it on a mild level. Always, 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 always. But no, it's not political, or it is societal, but it's pathological is what it is. And there is an external factor or an external aspect of a pathology, a mental illness. So that's a part of it for sure. Other than that, sure. I mean, but when it's specifically focused on body size to the point where it changes your behavior in a ritualistic way over and over and over again, that is a pathology. That is not politics.
Against the idea that thinness...
If you just feel like crap about how you look, but you don't change anything, then that's not the toxic ritualistic. There is a behavioral aspect to it as well. It's not just a feeling, but it's also not just a behavior. There's also a feeling behind it too. There is a obsession. There's an absolute obsession. When people talk about food noise, for example, that is an obsession with food. So if somebody is obsessed and they're not hungry, that is a mental illness. If somebody's hungry all the time, like physical hunger, actually hungry, or extremely tired all the time, that is more of a hormonal imbalance. But anything hormonal can be explained. And yes, ADHD does count, as there are issues with dopamine within ADHD. So if that's treated and it goes away, then there you have it. Then that was the problem. But still, if you just sit in that and you allow it to continue, then you're too lazy to figure out a solution for your problem. Regardless of what hormonal imbalance you have or how severe it is, you should work to fix it. If you don't, you are lazy. And then people will say, well, I don't have the means. Honey, you find a way. You're too lazy to find a way. We do have some levels of support system. There's usually, where there is a will, there's a way. There just is. Sorry. You're not going to get the poverty excuse to work with me. I've been impoverished and I still dealt with this issue. I was impoverished throughout the first, 2022 and 2023. I'll just say it. So the first year of my activism, yeah, it was horrible. But I lost a lot of weight that year. I lost 50 pounds. So it doesn't take money to lose. It doesn't. Okay, so let's continue.
Fascism, I think, stems from this idea, which again I've seen all over the internet, that there is a very strict binary here. Anyone who isn't preaching the gospel of maintaining a healthy weight is instead advocating for everyone to be so immobilized by their obesity that they can hardly get off the couch, which is also, I think, a willfully ignorant interpretation of the body positivity movement. Is there problematic behavior within the online body positivity movement as well? You bet your ass there is. But from my experience, consuming that content for literally a decade at this point, whether I wanted to or not, the general idea that is most often touted by people in the body positive community is that a person can be healthy while not fitting the stereotypical ideals of what a healthy body should look like. That the BMI scale doesn't actually dictate a person's lived experience in their own body, because some people can feel fine and have perfectly healthy test results and exist and function normally and still be considered obese on the BMI scale. That thin people...
No. So she's lost touch there. So you're losing touch, girl. That's not true. Even at class 1 obesity, you have dopaminergic issues. You have dopamine problems. You have issues absorbing iron. You have elevated estrogen. You put strain on your liver. You already start having hormonal problems. You get moody, more and more moody. It just gets worse. Class 2, you're going to get really depressed and all that kind of stuff. That's where it gets worse. Class 3, you can barely breathe at times. It's bad. But even class 1, moodiness, tiredness, inhibited ability to absorb things like iron, dopamine issues are all there. Elevated estrogen, all there. At class 1, obesity. It's not good for you. It is not good for you. It's not even good to be overweight, because the closer in proximity you are to obesity, you're still going to have some of those issues. It is a gradient. So it's not like, oh, I'm 1 pound below obesity, I'm fine. No, you're still overweight. You're right there. Your body can barely tell the difference. So you have to think about it logically and get a little bit of distance from obesity. When we're talking overweight, then it does depend on body composition. Somebody can have a lot of muscle and they can be overweight, but they're actually still healthy. But that is a very specific person that's typically athletic, and it's usually relatively obvious.
People who do fit the body ideal could be incredibly ill. That judging a person's worth based
Sure.
on the size of their body is probably
Worth is more of a toxic ritualistic thing, for sure. Health, yeah, you can totally be unhealthy and be a fitness influencer. I see it all the time, but I do call it out too whenever I see it, or I will point it out if somebody's lying, or whatever, that kind of thing. I think you need to be skeptical of people like that, because they're often trying to make money, and sometimes they gatekeep. Not everybody is great. I'll put it to you that way. Within that sphere, you have to be very skeptical of what people say and what people advocate for, because they often will advocate for things that undermine your results to keep you as a client longer. And that's pretty awful. But if it's less effort, you're not going to get as good of a result. That's the truth. I'm just going to say that. As far as people being unhealthy, yeah, a lot of people overtrain. That's not good either. I don't advocate for that. I advocate for health first, but I also will advocate for, vanity is fine too. But health has to come first.
problematic, and that there is discrimination that happens against fat people because our society has placed certain levels of worthiness onto people. That calories in versus calories out doesn't capture the whole picture of a person's weight and health. That things like poverty, childhood trauma, and mental health disorders and autoimmune
Poverty is not going to cause obesity. That is a flat out myth. Trauma doesn't cause it either. It is the toxic ritualistic that causes it, which is hinge specifically. So that trauma can lead to hinge. Even poverty, it can be a stressful state that when somebody gets out of poverty, that could trigger a hinge issue. So if somebody has prior experience with poverty, I think that's a very, very important disclaimer. You do not get obese in poverty, but you can from the memory of poverty or from getting out of poverty, which again, people act like you cannot get out of poverty in this country. That's not true. You can. It happens all the time. People go in and out of it. But again, that's a whole other discussion. And I think it's the same thing with looks. People don't like to acknowledge that looks can come and go. People don't like to acknowledge that money can come and go. Oh, well, it's true. So people will just say they're fat because they're impoverished. No. No. The memory of it, the stress of it, that can trigger something. Sure, that can. But let's talk about what it is. It's the toxic ritualistic. That's what it is. Anything that's stress or traumatic that induces a cycle, that induces a toxic ritualistic cycle, that is what is actually causing you to be overweight. It is that mental illness, which, yes, it can be triggered, but it's triggered by things like stress and trauma. And it has to be pretty severe stress and pretty chronic for it to be just stress related. But yeah, going to college, working 2 jobs, barely sleeping, that kind of cycle, which is somewhat common for like college age people, that could trigger something. Especially if there's a lot of drinking going on too, can affect your hormones and stuff. It can shift your brain, can make your brain think about things a little differently, and you can end up in a more mild form of it. But those childhood traumatic events, that can be more severe. So yeah, but it is the cycle that is making you obese. It's not the trauma itself, and it's not the poverty itself. It's not any of that. That's not true. So bring the attention back on the mental health aspect, the mental illness aspect. That is what is causing the issue within those things. As far as hormonally, it acts because you are hungrier. So you are still overeating. So it is still caused by overeating. And that hunger, you need to find a way to deal with it. There are typically different ways. And if you have access to a doctor and stuff like that, there are medications that can help, especially nowadays where we have Ozempic. For example, if you have insulin-related issues, from what I've seen and heard, it's very effective if you have access to that. And hopefully things get easier as the time goes on. And really look into your thyroid, figure out if you have a fatty liver, figure out these things. These things make hunger worse. If you're inactive, that will make hunger worse too. There are a lot of things that make hunger worse that can be managed, even if you are not wealthy. Okay?
Immune disorders that are, especially in women, criminally understudied and misunderstood, play a huge role in someone's weight and someone's ability to lose weight or gain weight or maintain a healthy weight. At its best, the body
slower is not impossible.
Positivity movement helps to complicate the conversations we have around weight and health, because it's not black and white, and we actually know very little relatively about nutrition and how the body works, despite all.
It's not that mystical, honey. Like, only the toxic ritualistic mystifies it. It's pretty basic. It's calories in, calories out, and each genetic person, every person genetically will respond better to a different macro ratio. And that macro ratio can change throughout a journey, or it can stay the same depending on the person. But it's really just, I do better with higher fat. I do better with lower fat. I do better with this. That's not that complicated. You don't need to figure out all of society. You just need to figure yourself out. So if you focus on yourself, then it's actually a lot easier to deal with, because you're not constantly looking at what everybody else is doing and constantly comparing, which is a part of a toxic ritualistic mental framework or mental matrix as well, as you're always comparing to other people. You're always looking at what everybody else is doing. That's pathological. It's okay to like take it in, but if you see something and you're like, I have to change because that person's doing it, that's weird. Okay? Think about how often that's happening. That's not healthy.
All the advances in modern medicine that do exist. But for the people in the Fat Logic subreddit and in comment sections across the internet, having those conversations just glorifies being unhealthy and is nothing more than a misunderstanding of.
It's just based on lies. There's a lot of delusion. There's a lot of exaggeration. There's a lot of lies. People that have these issues, any of them, whether it's overly reductive, whether it's Mia, they all lie. All of them lie. So people will lie constantly. That's a part of it too. Within Hinge, you even lie to yourself. You lie so often to yourself that you can actually dissociate. You can create like an issue if it's that severe, where you literally will start to not even realize how much you're actually eating. Or you'll go into episodes where it's like you are consuming and you're not even thinking about it at all. That's more at a severe level, or where every single aspect of your life has to do with how you look and what you're consuming. Every single thing. That's when it's very severe.
The clearly established basics of biology and physics. Okay, but instead of fully engaging in those arguments, I do actually want to take a step back, because this is a symptom of a larger issue that we should have a conversation about when we're talking about bodies and how they are policed in order to serve the ends of the government. Because what all of these conversations revolve around, whether within the Fat Logic subreddit or the body positivity movement or elsewhere, is this ideal of being quote unquote healthy. Not only that there is one singular ideal of what healthy looks like, but that it is assumed that all self-respecting.
So within body weight, there is going to be a normal weight range in every single species on the entire planet. Humans are not exempt from that. Humans have a normal weight range, period. I'll be right back. I need to drink some water. If you deny that human beings have a normal weight range, That is a mental health issue. You are delusional. I will tell you that. That is delusion.
People should strive for that singular ideal of health. And whether or not someone
People
strives,
should strive for normalized weight because it's healthier. Human beings are meant to weigh within a certain range, like every other species on the planet. Every other one. We are not the exception.
for health determines their worth on some level. This pervasive obsession
It's
with
not about
health
worth, it's about health, and it's about the costs on society, the costs on the individual. It's just bad. There are some things that no matter how you try to frame it politically, it is just a bad thing. It is just not good. That's all.
health, or even trying
It's
to convince people that
impractical. You can consider it immoral based on different religious persuasions. It doesn't make sense politically. I don't care if you're coming at it from a right-wing perspective. I would tell you you should have self-accountability and take care of yourself. If you're coming at it from a left-wing perspective, you need to be accountable to society and the healthcare system where we're all sharing into that. It doesn't matter. Even if you're somewhere in between, then both of them. It doesn't matter. I mean, even if you were a libertarian, it would make more sense to be of a normalized weight because you're relying on yourself. It just doesn't make any sense. If you're in other persuasions, it's a waste of resources. If you're concerned about the environment, it's a waste. If you're concerned about personal financial responsibility, it is a waste. There is no good argument for being obese. It doesn't exist. Regardless of how you look at it, it is just a bad thing. It is just bad. There are some things that are just not good. It just isn't. There is no argument for this. The only thing that you can say is, I'm lazy and I'm overindulgent, or I have this toxic issue and I do not care to get out of it because I'm too terrified to get out. Those are at least true. Because even if you have a hormonal issue, if you are neglecting that, if you're not looking for an answer, then you're lazy. I'm sorry. It is what it is, which I don't think anybody should advocate for laziness. I don't think that it's good for anything. Literally anything. No matter what you believe, what the hell, what is the point of that? Who would advocate for that? I don't see it. All across the political aisle, it's bad. You do what you can, no matter what. It's just human. It is human to expect people to do what they can and bring what they can to the table. And it is just literal, basic, biological human survival to take care of your physical health in every way, shape you can. It just does not make sense not to. It just doesn't. And you do the best you can. You do the best you can. You'll have the best result you can have. But most of the time, people that are saying this stuff, they're not doing the best they can. That's why they have to justify it with all this stuff. Because they're not doing their best.
health can exist at every size kind of turns us into the proverbial fish that is so surrounded by water they don't even realize they're swimming in it. In trying to convince people that fat people can still be healthy, we are taking for granted what health is and that it should be the ultimate end goal for everyone, and that someone's failure to at least attempt to be healthy is a deep moral failing. Once we step back and identify that assumption,
it's not even a moral failing, it's impractical. It goes against even just basic biology. It goes against like everything. I don't know. There's just no good argument for this. There just isn't. It's unacceptable. Absolutely unacceptable.
Now we can start having conversations around the politics of bodies. Instead of infighting in the comment section over whether or not Ariana Grande is healthy, let's discuss why we have placed so much moral emphasis on health to begin with, because that is its own social construct that has been orchestrated and promoted.
It's not a social construct. It is physical. It is based upon physical reality. And only people who have always been healthy say that. If you haven't had your health, then you know exactly what it is. If you've taken it for granted and you lost it, then you immediately know. You immediately know what it is. It's very real. It is not a social construct. That is very disrespectful to people who are unhealthy, not by choice. People who have so many different issues. But I can assure you that obesity, whatever issue you have, it's just going to make it worse. It will just make it even worse. So even if you do have like you're chronically ill, being obese is going to make it worse. It doesn't make it better. There is no justification. There just isn't. To try to provide a justification is delusional. It is delusional.
Promoted by individuals and governments for centuries. I'm, of course, not the first person to ever make this point. There's a great book called Fearing the Black Body, The Racial Origins of Fat Phobia by Dr. Sabrina Strings. So if I haven't convinced you that it is, in fact, that deep, please consider giving that book a read. It's really revelatory, because when we start examining how notions of health and what is the correct body to have shifted and changed throughout history, that's when we start to see how these notions perhaps are not orchestrated by fascism, but are certainly convenient for fascism to thrive. If we go back to the Renaissance, which was
too loose of a connection. It's not a good argument, girl.
Through the 1600s, the aesthetic of the Rubenesque woman was the European beauty standard. These women were stately, to say the least, often somewhat muscular thanks to the influence of Greek art on the Renaissance, but also full-figured. Some might say, God forbid, fat. Fatness equated to wealth, but also fertility, especially where you have a societal system dominated by feudal lords and the peasants who serve them. Then came the transatlantic slave trade, the growth of the sugarcane trade that allowed for imports of larger and larger amounts of sugar into Europe, making it a lot more affordable and accessible to the everyday commoner. It was the increase in sugar consumption that helped precipitate a growing awareness of fatness and body mass, because, oh no, now the poors are getting fat. But it was the othering of enslaved Africans.
It was still unhealthy for people who were rich prior to this time. People were diabetic when they were obese, even if they were rich. People had health problems. People died younger and had all these issues still. Their teeth rotted out of their face. All that stuff still happened if they had money back in the day. It wasn't good. You can even look at like ancient Egyptian stuff where people had stuff. Like I was looking at, I think somebody talked about the archaeology of it, and they were able to see that they had diabetes and stuff because of how they were eating. It doesn't matter how long ago it was. Physical reality still hit. It still kicked in. There is nothing wrong with valuing health. That doesn't make any sense. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to do better than the past. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, I think we do have to cap it at a certain point, at least from an activistic perspective. You know, I personally advocate for average. So I would pressure people to normalize their weight. That's what I call it, which just basically means get to a place where you're not overweight or underweight. And you don't necessarily have to look amazing, but you need to get to that point. You can be kind of thick or you can be kind of skinny. That's okay, but you need to be within a healthy range. Not everybody has to be super buff or have abs or whatever. But if you want to, there's nothing wrong with that. And it's a good thing as long as it's done healthfully. But that's extra and that's okay. But yeah, I mean, I do think a social enforcement of average weight is healthy. It's good for a society. It doesn't have to be an unattainable standard or something that most people cannot sustain. It can be just average. Average is okay. Average is literally average. It's fine.
That helped precipitate the fear and dread of having a higher body fat percentage. The European fascination with the wild, uncivilized black body is best exemplified in the story of the South African woman named Sarah Baartman, who was put on display as a kind of freak show in the early 1800s. People from all across Europe would come to gawk at her because she was allegedly double-cheeked up, and the Europeans saw it as a sort of living natural history museum. Not a human, but simply a freakish example of the exoticism of the African continent. She died at the age of 26 in 1815, and afterwards her remains, including her brain, genitalia, skeleton, and a body cast, were put on display in various museums. Her skeleton and body cast were displayed facing away from the viewer to emphasize continued interest in her exotic proportions, and remained on display until the mid-1970s. Her remains were eventually repatriated to her homeland in South Africa and officially buried in August 2002. Like, history is not that distant from us, you know? The point is that it was around this time, the late 1700s, early 1800s, and beyond, when the transatlantic slave trade was at its peak, when Europeans were being...
It is quite the reach to then say it's okay to be fat because of that. The connection doesn't exist. History can exist, of course, but it doesn't make it okay to be fat today. It doesn't. It's still a reach.
Indoctrinated with the savagery of the Africans, that body policing away from full-figured women and towards a thin ideal began to first take shape. Victorians were real weird about labeling and categorizing everything, and a lot of pseudoscience sprung up to attempt to reinforce the differences between Europeans and Africans, to try to create categories of people based on physical differences that in turn represented something inherent in the person with that physical difference. In time, the accumulation of body fat was equated with the out-of-control and barbaric black race, and it was the duty of the European woman to get as far away from that body type as possible. To be thin, to control one's intake, was a sign of refinement, of race.
Do they really believe that people who were enslaved were really overweight? Do we really believe that they were fed more than enough? Because I don't believe that for a second. It's just not making sense. It's not adding up. This is clearly wrong. There's something wrong here.
Racial superiority, of godly self-control that no African could ever possess. Body policing coincided with the invention of races as a means of justifying continued enslavement of human beings. It's fine because they are different and worth less.
Body size and race are not the same thing, and they never will be. It's just not the same. I don't know what else to say. It's totally not. It's completely different
than us Europeans, and attempting to reinforce the supremacy of Europe and of the white race over others. This is, of course, also when eugenics was invented to give an official air to the...
So yeah, this is very, very, very toxic ritualistic reinforcement. So all of this, what is the purpose of all of this? It is to encourage somebody, particularly somebody on the left of politics, who has this problem, this mental health issue, to continue. That's basically what it is at its face value. Again, there are other enforcements of other types, but that's what she's focusing on. She's specifically hitting other left-wing people that have this problem and using the politics to reinforce what a person is doing. So it's okay to be lazy and indulgent, or it's okay to stay within this cycle that you're using as a distraction, either from chronic stress or from deep-rooted trauma. So that's basically what it is. So it's using racial justification, it's using historical justification. It's saying a fascist likes somebody who's in shape, so therefore if you like somebody to be in shape, then you're also a fascist. It's all this type of stuff. It's not real. None of this is really real or even relevant. What does any of this have to do with being fat today? The physical toll of obesity still hits no matter what, no matter when, no matter who.
Racism through the creation of pseudoscience that sounded legitimate but was based on nothing. That's also when the early body mass index, or BMI scale, was invented. Remember how those Victorians loved categorizing and making shit up? Yeah, this was one of those instances. In fact, the BMI scale was heavily relied upon by Francis Galton, one of the primary developers of eugenics. It was originally created by a...
I think body fat ranges are better. They're more correlated with health outcomes. But within obesity itself, so class 1, 2, and 3, the BMI is very useful because you tend to see the worst health outcomes on a statistical level at those different classes of obesity.
Man named Adolf Quetelet, who was on a mission to determine the social ideal of the average man. His index was never meant to be used as a medical test, but instead was simply a measure of the ideal average normal distribution of weights of men in 1835, and not even men generally. His data was taken from Scottish Highland soldiers and French soldiers, all male. It was, as is still the case for most medical studies, a metric designed for European men. The term BMI was coined by Ansel Keys in 1972 in a paper in which Keys also noted that the BMI was not fully satisfactory, but was, quote, as good as any other relative weight index as an indicator of relative obesity. Not of health, of relative obesity. He also noted that the BMI scale was a useful tool for population.
It's more for statistical analysis, like she's just about to say. It's more for that on a societal level, which it can correlate with different health outcomes. If we're going on an individual basis, I do think body fat percentage is better. Even if it's an estimation, it's still very useful, in my opinion.
Population studies, but not appropriate to be used for individual evaluations. So for studying population trends and data, BMI numbers may prove useful, but for evaluating the health of an individual, it is not a particularly useful tool. But because it's so simple and has been repeatedly published since it was originally created, it's been adopted as a tool to judge individuals based on their weight as compared to the average Scottish or French soldier in 1835. Okay, but that's kind of an aside. The point is that the popular notion that thin is preferable has origins in the transatlantic slave trade, fear of being associated with blackness, and religious ideals of piety and self-control, also as a means of differentiating and distancing oneself from blackness and poverty. In a piece for Afropunk, Leslie Vargas writes, over time, thinness...
It does not make any sense. Poverty doesn't lead to fatness, so this is not real. This is just wrong. It's just completely wrong.
Has transcended race, becoming a symbol of wealth and privilege across communities. For Black women, thinness now operates as a form of social capital, a means to navigate a world that polices Black bodies with even greater scrutiny. In spaces where thinness is equated with success...
See, this is very toxic ritualistic. So when it comes to the problem, the DIS order... thinness is placed on a pedestal, particularly, well, really with all of them, but within Hinge, it's used as a comparison. So this person has better outcomes because of their weight compared to mine. So everything becomes an issue with your weight, or you can blame everything on your weight. It becomes a way to cope with any disappointment, any and all disappointment. Well, that just happened to me because I'm fat. That's just because I'm fat. They didn't like me because I'm fat. I don't have money because I'm fat. I don't have this because I'm fat. You see how obsessive it is? Everything is about being fat. When it's particularly about body size, when you are obsessed with that, that is toxic ritualistic. That is an issue, especially considering it is a very mutable characteristic. It is something that can and needs to be reinforced constantly. Whether that's being hugely fat or whether that's being a normal weight or too small. We'll just put it to you that way. It all has to be reinforced because it's mutable. It changes. It can change. So often the people who are advocating against maintaining an average weight, they're constantly arguing with themselves why they should maintain a big size. Because you have to, because it doesn't make sense. And it's actually difficult. It's actually challenging to do it because there's a lot of money that goes into it. There's a lot of time. You have to sit still a lot. People don't talk about that. But since I became more active, I'm so much happier being active. It would be so hard for me to sit still all the time now. I would feel like I wasn't living anymore. And people don't think about that because you convince yourself that it's better. And you have to convince yourself every single day. Exercise is horrible. Exercise is horrible. Exercise is horrible. Exercise is horrible. Exercise feels awful. Exercise feels awful. Exercise feels awful. Exercise. You have to say that every single day. If you just stop, then it starts to change. And you're like, oh, what is the big deal about it? Because it's not a big deal. But you have to reinforce these things. So, and again, to me, this is using political or, racial politics or whatever to justify the toxic ritualistic. It's the same thing with anything, any kind of politics or religion, any kind of lens you could look at something. People will use that to justify being bigger. And like I said, you have to, because you have to say, like, I need to do this because this, that, and the other. And it's also something that you just tell other people too, because you want them to get off your back. You don't want to justify it. The toxic ritualistic fantasy is to be able to engage with the toxic ritualistic behaviors without judgment. That is a fantasy that will never happen, for the record, but that is the fantasy. So often they will advocate to normalize all of these things as much as possible so that you do not have to get out of the coping mechanism. And that's it, which we might need to read this article.
Health and desirability. Black women are pressured to conform to these standards, further erasing the rich diversity of body types within Black communities. And thinness definitely plays a role, but I would argue that it's actually health that has become the status symbol, the commodity of the rich. Women can be trailer trash and also skinny, for example, but it is health that is put on this pedestal because it is so unattainable for the average person who has high cortisol from the stress of working and trying to pay for rent and healthcare and everything else that's expensive but necessary for living.
I still got healthier. I was impoverished and I still was doing it. I was still broke as hell in 2024. That's what I would consider it. I am not even, oh gosh, I'm doing better this year, but it is not at all flushed. I'll put it to you that way. Not at all. Like, to me, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm doing so good because I can afford glasses and a teeth deep cleaning. This is like, it's a step above base survival, put it to you that way. But I still have to like scuttle for the rent after I got my glasses. I haven't gotten the new ones yet. But it's that kind of thing. It's like I could do health insurance this year. So that's like, whoa. That's where I'm at. And I still was able to lose. Like, it's not, and I still am healthier. I don't believe in this defeatist attitude of my circumstances are difficult, so I should just give up and die. That's a hell no for me. You're never going to get that here. That is a crock of bullshit. Absolute crock. You fight this shit like hell. You do not let it take you out. Never. I don't care what the fuck your circumstances are. I am never going to tell you it's okay for you to give up and die because you're not doing well. It's not. You fight like hell. You do the best you can to get out of it. That is bullshit. That's enough to take out the witch hat. Which, by the way, that is the witch. The witch represents the survivalism of losing weight from supermorbid obesity. You fight like hell to live because you are worth that. You are worth it. It doesn't matter how broke you are worth it. It doesn't matter if your circumstances are stressful. You are worth it. And shame on her for saying that you're not, which is basically what she's saying. You're not going to get that here. Never. Ooh, no. You survive. You fight and you survive. I don't care. I don't care what you have going on. That is bullshit. You do the best you can because you are worth that. You absolutely are.
someone who doesn't have time to go to the gym or meal prep or have the energy to eat 3 balanced, high protein, high fiber meals every day.
That's a little different. That has to do with the vanity weight era. That has to do with somebody who is losing weight that is not necessarily necessary to lose. It is more for looks, which, sure, I've argued, yes, you do have to be in a decent position to do a vanity weight era because it is otherwise impractical. It is impractical. It is a sacrifice of time and energy that is not technically necessary, meaning that you have to have time and energy to sacrifice to accomplish it, whether you do it slow and steady or whether you do it quicker. If it's quicker and deeper, it's going to take a lot. And I am honest about that. But when we're talking about supermorbid obesity, morbid obesity, obesity class 1, no. You can lose. There is no excuse. Even overweight, there's no excuse. You just track. And it's always going to be cheaper to eat less food. It always will. So you normalize that weight. That's bullshit.
The moneyed class with leisure is the only class capable of truly attaining health at the level that society has deemed is correct. This is
She's
not
such a liar. Liar. Absolute lies. And I did it broke as hell. So, like I said, my sense of stability where I could do this vanity weight era is just because I don't have kids. I'm single. I'm introverted. I don't have much of a life. So I was able to do it because I don't have a lot going on. I still work all the time. I'm still stressed. I still am like, ooh, rent's coming up. You know, and any extra I have, it had to go towards practical things like my car or getting glasses or getting my teeth deep cleaned. For example, I had to finance all of that. Schlit. It's not, I'm not flushed. I'm not desperate or near destitution. That's not true. I would not consider myself impoverished at all this year. So again, those words mean something to me. So no, I'm not. But that's the point. You can do it, but you have to have time. That's true. But it was hard. I worked 2 jobs and I have to go to the gym after. That's hard. But again, I don't have a life. I don't have I don't have a bunch of kids or anything. I don't have that going on. But if you do, you can still find time or you can do it slower, but you have to decide where that makes sense for you. But that is within a vanity weight era. That has nothing to do with being obese. It just doesn't, or even overweight. You can do it. You can. It may be slower, it may be faster. And maybe start and stop. It doesn't fucking matter. But you can do it. She's wrong.
Of fascism or being caused by the rise of fascism, this has been an issue since before Trump got elected. Heroin chic existed in the 90s under a Democratic president. Our boomer parents are almond moms with fucked up relationships with food and their bodies because beauty standards in the 50s and 60s were so specific that weighing 10 to 15 pounds more or less than you should would lead to ridicule and public shaming. That our fascist overlords can get away with more because we're all starving ourselves into oblivion is merely a happy coincidence of years of conditioning us to police each other over health. That
starving means something. Poverty means something. I don't like these words being thrown around. No. If you are overweight, you are not starving. You can be malnourished. Like I said, you can loosen it a little bit and you can consider something like iron deficient anemia to be a form of starvation, but it is not literal starvation. That is not true. You are not starving.
RFK Jr. was able to capitalize on years of crunchy granola liberals falling down the Maha pipeline into anti-vax land, where health has been twisted and contorted to fit an anti-science worldview, one that is based partially on well-founded fear.
The self-awareness has left the room. What is your scientific justification for obesity? Where is that? Where is that? Is it in the room with us? Because you're throwing science out. You're throwing everything out. I don't know what the hell you're doing. This is not okay. Again, people can have different opinions on how to get places. That's fine. There are things that I agree with RFK Jr. There are things that I don't agree with RFK Jr. I could say that with every single person when it comes to health. I have my own opinions on things. I argue all the time, at least in my own mind, with fitness influencers where they say things that I do not agree with. Everybody has the right to agree and disagree on certain minute details of health. You know, my overall generalized activistic message is do what works. Figure out what works for you. Everybody has different genetic responses to macronutrient ratios. That's true for me. I did better with lower fat. That's not going to be true for every single person. It's just not. Now, that being said, I'm happily eating more fat as I'm getting out of my deficit, and it's really helpful. I do advocate for balance, but in certain cases, people can do better if they have less or more of something. I think that that's true. You'll be able to tell by if you're hungry or not, if you're too hungry. Your body will tell you, you know? But yeah, I mean, it's a delicate balance between your own standards and what is practically possible and a normalized weight. And the normalized weight aspect, it is important. It's very important because humans have a healthy weight range and you need to be in that range.
That our world is full of contaminants from major corporations that don't care about our health, and partially on conspiracy theories and pseudoscience.
You can advocate to change certain pollutants. You can advocate for the environment. You can advocate to find new ways of doing things. There is nothing, absolutely nothing wrong with that, with seeing it as a problem. I do think smog, for example, is an issue. It does affect people's health. You know, even the difference between like just having unleaded gasoline, that really helped, for example. We can always look for ways to advance things in ways that are workable and good. And again, we can agree and disagree or whatever, and people can advocate for whatever they want to advocate when it comes to that stuff. I do have views on that, but I'm not really I'm not there in terms of my activism, but I just hope that there is reform in how our food is created. I do think there are problems. There's a lot of issues. I think even sustainable issues, there's problems that concern me. But that being said, we have to look at what's in front of us today, which is the food that's on our plate, how much of it we're eating, and how big we are. You know? That's what we can control, which, again, quite frankly, that is a part of the toxic ritualistic cycle, is the whole fact that the entire time you're in control. That's why it's a coping mechanism. So if you can control it, which you can, especially as a grown adult, then you got to do what you got to do to remain healthy. It's prudent, it's responsible, it's practical. It's all of those things. There's no reason not to. It doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't.
Science. It's not a plan formulated by the Trump regime, but instead the Trump regime thriving where body and health policing has already taken hold. This racism, this patriarchy telling us to stay small and quiet, this was all already within us. Fascism just stepped in.
So the issue is that there was still reinforcement within people telling other people to be bigger. People do reinforce these things. It's a human quality. This is something that was probably reinforced way back in the day within tribes or groups of people or whatever. You know, when we were just purely nomadic, it still was probably enforced. It's a part of our human biology to do so. It's something that will always exist, and it can either be used for good or for bad. And I think enforcing other people to be obese is bad. And that is what you are doing. Advocating for average weight, that's great. That's good for a society, because there is never going to be a society where nobody ever comments on anybody's body ever. That does not exist. It is not within our biology. It is not how human beings work. It just is not. We are a social species. We are hierarchical to a certain extent. We have leaders. We have followers. That is how human beings work. And we look for group norms. And yes, we were in nomadic groups. I'm sure there were people that were different, and maybe those differences helped. I've heard examples, for example, of people who are highly sensitive. The highly sensitive person within the tribe, they could wake up easily. They could hear what was going on before other people, and they could alert people of the danger. For example, there are those genetic differences within people as well. So we still have specialization and special skills, even within the roots of our existence. For example, some people are stronger, some people are smarter, etc. But it was all to serve the group, for group survival, because we are a group-oriented species. We are a social species. We do not do very well alone or in solitary confinement. So yes, we are a social species. We do enforce things on each other. That is how human beings work. But we need to make sure that we're enforcing good things when it comes to body size. Because if we aren't, then bad things will be enforced. Whether that's, we'll just say, too little or too much, it will happen. So people have to advocate. We need to enforce health, a healthy weight range. Because if we don't, then the toxic ritualistic world will enforce for you. And that is just a fact. It is a part of the human condition. It's a part of humanity. That is who we are. Welcome.
How can I exploit this? So while I do love to blame the fascists for the ills currently being inflicted upon this country, this one can be blamed on something else, something that implanted itself in America long before today's fascist takeover. Say it with me, neoliberalism. Okay, stick with me here. Mid-century America saw post-war prosperity and a blossoming middle class. That, combined with free market neoliberalism, to emphasize the individual, the entrepreneur, the bootstrapper, the American dream, the self-reliant individual who relies on their own dedication and hard work, letting the state off the hook for providing much of anything. That was put on steroids thanks to, say it with me, Ronald fucking Reagan, who brought rugged cowboy individualism to the White House and sold America on the lie of trickle-down economics, deregulating industries from sea to shining sea, leading
Again, these are her political opinions, which she has a right to. Everybody has a right to their opinions, in my opinion. So this is, in my opinion, this is unrelated to fatness. I'm going to see if she brings it back in.
The monopolistic, deregulated hellscape that has catapulted the wealth of the 1% into the stratosphere while leaving the rest of us with stagnant wages, a predatory health insurance industry, and a depleted housing market. Thanks to that deregulation and the rampant capitalism of the last century, we are now sicker than we've ever been, and we can't trust businesses or our government to do anything about it. But thanks to that rugged individualism, it's actually all our fault as individuals if we can't muscle through, literally, the impossible.
When it comes to body weight, it is primarily the individual, because a person can choose to listen or ignore what is being reinforced towards them. That is always the case. It is a choice, always. So there is always going to be an individualistic aspect to this, especially when you bring in the toxic ritualistic. Again, though, it is complicated. There are reinforcement mechanisms. There is a social aspect to the problem. And there are social aspects to how we eat. But at the end of the day, individual differences can always outweigh any reinforcement. That's also true. So while there may be a relationship, it's not always about pure individualism. It's about survival. It's about, am I going to do the best I can personally with what I have and who I have to work with? The answer should be yes. Period. Even if the relationship is a mix, it doesn't matter. A person's choice can still take out everything else. It's the same thing with somebody who is toxically ritualistic. You could have everybody around you not agree with what you're doing, and you're still going to do it. And you may even continue to do it as a form of rebellion, which that is a part of these issues as well.
Societal odds and just be healthy. Much like MAGA today and Reagan last century taught us to fear the welfare queens and the immigrants mooching off the system, anyone who is unhealthy because of anything that might be attributable to lifestyle choices is simply mooching off the system because of their own ignorance, stupidity, and laziness. And listen, let me acknowledge there is definitely personal agency when it comes to your individual health. I'm not saying people are just the hopeless, hapless results of their environment and they should just lay down and accept the nihilism of their situation. Moving your body more and eating vegetables is a conscious choice that some people can make, but it is the oversimplification of being healthy. It is ableist as fuck to decide that everyone can just choose health, and the self-righteousness with which healthy people
doing the best you can
speak about unhealthy people, the moral judgment placed on people who are unhealthy, and assuming that body weight is the best test of someone's worthiness for empathy. That shit is toxic.
Yeah, it's toxic ritualistic for sure. But in terms of practical reality, normalizing your weight is going to be a huge part of everything you do. We live in our bodies. Our bodies are our way of getting through life. If you don't take care of it the best you can, regardless of what's going on, you're going to have a worse outcome. And there's no reason to advocate against that. It doesn't make sense. And I don't know if she realizes that she's advocating against it. It doesn't make sense. It just doesn't. Oops.
And it mirrors the thinking and worldview of fascists. It helps to normalize seeing certain people.
It's too loose of a connection. Very, very weak connection. No, this is not working.
Others as worth more than others. And that is the central tenet.
Most people do not talk about worth in terms of it. They talk about logic. They talk about, it's literally called fat logic, for example. It's what's logical and practical. You can talk about it from a moral perspective, but again, that's usually within a religious framework, which people agree or disagree or whatever. But pretty much every religion is going to advocate for taking care of your body. And even your most ardent atheist is going to agree that taking care of your body the best that you can makes the most practical sense. It doesn't make any sense to not. It's just a typical thing of, I don't want to have any accountability. I don't want to put in the effort. Or I want to desperately cling on to this coping mechanism that is bad for me, which that should be advocated against, regardless of what toxic coping mechanism it is. That's horrible. We want people to do as good as they can, you know? Reinforcing this in somebody it's leading somebody to their death. It's not healthy. It's not helpful. It's not good. It's not moral to do what you are doing in this video. It's not. It's wrong.
Off the streets into unmarked vans because they speak Spanish or maybe don't have their documents in order, which is not a criminal offense, by the way. But we are able to look the other way because we are more worthy. We were born here. We aren't criminals. We're more human than they are. And the capitalists and the billionaires and major corporate shareholders benefit no matter what, no matter who's in office, because this creates impossible standards that we are all chasing, that we are willing to spend hundreds and thousands of dollars to attempt.
Being average is not impossible. It just isn't. It could take a while depending on where you're coming from, but it is not impossible. That's not true.
And all they have to do is tap into that desire and promise us a cure, so that when Ozempic, the miracle weight loss drug, comes onto the market, promising to fix all our ailments, to give us the thinness we so deeply desire, so that we can finally prove our worth, well, the perfect storm is already there.
Yeah, if she feels this way, she might have a toxic ritualistic issue, which, you know, it's showing it's rearing its ugly head, you know, in terms of this issue. It comes out. People get triggered and they show their hand often. And if she really believes all this, which I have a feeling she does, I don't get a feeling that she's performative. I don't. Personally, I don't. So I'm thinking she might actually have the problem, because it's sad. It doesn't matter like what side of the aisle somebody's on or what they believe religiously or whatever. On a human level, it is very sad when this is in somebody. And I think it's tragic in a way. I don't even know if she's aware. And I hope she gets out of it, because this isn't it. This isn't good. This isn't healthy. This isn't good for you. And human to human, I will always care about this issue so much. I mean, it almost killed me. So it's like, I don't want anybody to have this problem. I don't care what you believe. I don't care what anybody believes. I don't want them to have this problem. I don't even care even if I personally can't stand somebody, or I had beef or a vendetta against somebody, I wouldn't want this issue to take hold in them. I wouldn't want this. I would hope that they would get out of it, even if I couldn't stand the person, because there's always going to be that human part of me that is like, oh my gosh, and I will never reinforce it for anybody. I don't even care if I hate your guts. I would never reinforce this. It's just something I could never do it in good conscience. And I've told you guys, a lot of my activism, it comes from a sense of survivor's guilt, because it was that close to being done. And it's like, I have to think about it, and I'm like, well, I'm still alive for some reason, and I'm going to do something about it. And I think that that's what we all should do. We should all find our path or whatever. And this is just my cause that's very important to me. But all I'm saying is, don't believe this. This isn't true. I want you to do well with this stuff. I think the goal is to get out of the toxic ritualistic so you can just live your life and you can be happy outside of it. You don't have to think about it all the time. I don't think about this all the time. I don't think about my body and all this stuff. And it's literally my activism, and I still don't, because I'm not in the toxic ritualistic anymore. I don't care that much. It doesn't hold that emotional weight that it did. I can look at my body very practically and logically and in a cool way that is just wholly logical. And that took a long time for me to get there, but it is possible. And it comes from not obsessing over it. And you do have to put up boundaries with other people that are still in the issue. You have to break out of it. And it is tough, because people get very upset when people get out. So, which I talk about that a lot on my channel as well. So, like I said, I hope that if she believes this, which I feel like she does, I really do. I hear the passion in her voice. I don't think it's fake. I really don't. I hope she can get through this, because it's tragic. It always is tragic. And a lot of people are unaware, and again, it's reinforced so often. And she's in this body positivity, where there were a lot of people that have Hinge and that, and she's been reinforced often by them too. It keeps it going. You don't want it to keep going. You want to shut it down. You want it done.
And the drug manufacturers are simply cashing in. And it is us, online, in the comment sections, in our communities, doing the policing work that benefits the fascists and the capitalists by commenting endlessly on whether or not people are living up to the healthy ideals that they are morally supposed to live up to, including Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo and Michelle Yeoh, who have gone too far. And I'm not sure they're healthy, and therefore they are worthy of criticism, which lets everyone in society watching the conversation unfold know.
See, she's starting to reinforce the reductive side too. It's not acceptable either. I don't accept that either on this channel. We don't accept it. We don't accept any of it. It's not acceptable. And society should not accept the toxic ritualistic. Any version of it. It's all wrong. It's bad. It's awful. It's maladaptive. It's a coping mechanism that is extremely toxic, and it will kill you. If you go with it, it will kill you. It is deadly. So no, it's not okay for them. It's not.
On notice.
But she's literally starting to reinforce that. It's just horrible. And like I said, typically when people reinforce, it's not out of spite or hatred or anything. It comes from your own deep-seated fears of getting out of the issue because you don't know what to do without it. Or you're scared, or you're just like, what am I going to do with my time if I don't have this? And it's something that really makes people anxious.
If they too step out of line of the ideals of health in either direction, this mob of criticism will come for them too. All this does is help the capitalists accumulate more wealth. Oops, so sorry. Every video lately has turned into a Marxist criticism, but yeah, here we are. Your obsession with policing the health of everyone around you only reinforces the narrative that individuals are solely to blame if they fall outside the confines of what you think is healthy. And in fact, what you think is healthy has been dictated mostly by centuries of men just making...
You can always approach the issue from a compassionate place, but sometimes the compassionate thing is to not reinforce. The compassionate thing is to burst the bubble. I will always advocate for you to do it as coolly logical as possible. Somebody within the toxic ritualistic, they're always going to want to emotionalize the issue. Do not allow them to emotionalize the issue. Keep it cool. Keep it calm. That is what I will always advocate for. That is the most effective. It's toxic to say, but it ruins the fun of it for the person in it because they want to create a drama out of it. If you make it into a huge fight, it feels it. You make it cool, calm, logical. Burst the bubble. Ask the questions. Do it that way because it is an issue of pure emotion, basically, or it's an issue of a lack of logic. It is a mental illness. So if you force somebody to engage in the logical part of their brain, when you're talking about this with them, they will be forced to look at it because it's not logical. And it's tricky. It really is. And people can get really angry over it. But do not get angry with them. That's my advice. Don't. But always criticize the ideas. I'm not really about criticizing the person necessarily. Sometimes I will. But it's only when I feel like people are spreading it to other people. I think that's awful, which she is spreading it to other people. And she is reinforcing, which is awful. She may not be aware of it, but it's still happening. And sometimes you do have to call people out for people to understand because that's what she's doing. Now you're starting to reinforce the reductive side of things too. That's really bad. And they do reinforce each other. You just saw it happen.
Making shit up, usually influenced by the patriarchy or racism or both. And therefore, it is up to individuals to force themselves to conform to these body standards. And if they can't manage to do that, then they are bad and lazy because the end goal isn't really health. Because if these people policing other people's bodies genuinely cared about their health, that would require a level of empathy that people seem incapable of extending to those who have been othered, those seen as morally reprehensible.
Empathy does not mean affirmation. They're not the same thing. Understanding doesn't mean co-signing somebody's bullshit. It doesn't. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is to not reinforce this. Reinforcement is cruel.
aren't healthy, and it abdicates the state's responsibility to provide for its people the basics necessary to sustain life, which is what I think the state ought to be responsible for. But for capitalists, the primary usefulness of the state lies in its ability to protect property and nothing else. So by assigning blame to individuals and letting the state off the hook, you are playing into the hands of...
It doesn't matter how good the state is. If people have a choice, people will choose the toxic ritualistic. It is a pathology. It is not something chosen in sanity. And that is so difficult for people to understand. It really threatens people. And it doesn't mean that you're delusional about literally everything in your life. You're delusional about this aspect of your life. It is usually pretty compartmentalized. However, in severe levels, the toxic ritualistic mindsets can shift into other areas of life. I see it happen very often with romance and with finances. Those two specifically. Maybe there is an element of our brain that it's connected to food processing. I don't know. Again, there's so much research that could be done, but I'm just saying it's something that I've observed. People that are deeply in the toxic ritualistic can become delusional romantically, delusional financially. So, yeah, but I think typically it's to serve the overall toxic ritualistic cycle at a severe level where you start to create stress so that you can engage in it even more, which is horrible. That's very severe though. But that will manifest by choosing a partner that is not compatible with you so that it will trigger the behaviors, or overspending or being irresponsible with money so that it can trigger stress as well. Or oftentimes spending too much money on food will also happen as well. So it can all go together for sure. But anyways, that's a different point.
The 1% who say, yes, good, shrink the state so that I can continue to exploit people's labor and pay no taxes while everyone who works for me remains just sick enough to be too tired to organize against me, but with just enough access to modern medicine to remain alive, to continue to labor.
People are also sick when they're obese. So that argument can be used the other way as well. I don't tend to go with that as much because I think it is more of an individual issue or a cultural issue. If it is, it's like social. It's not necessarily political, which there are differences because it's like a family, like being within a family system. That's going to have so much more of an effect on the way that you eat rather than the government or who's in office. It's just not connected. It can sometimes be related, but it is so tiny compared to the impact of the family you live with or the impact of an individual's choices or even the impact of social reinforcement. It is so different.
For me, because they have to, because otherwise they will have no health insurance and no home. And oops, here we are, back where every single episode has ended lately, and that is class struggle. Hello. A person can be perfectly healthy and also technically obese based on their BMI. Whether or not a person is healthy does not
true
and should not determine their worthiness for empathy and respect. You can be the epitome of health and die of a heart attack tomorrow. You can struggle to maintain...
That's not true. Okay, that was a very weird statement.
Your health through no fault of your own. There are so many huge industries.
Sure, but if you have, when it comes to body size, you do have control over it. So that doesn't count here. Different things are different. Let's not cloud that too much.
Order to make their money, that the odds are frankly stacked against us. You actually can't tell a person's health by just looking at them. That's literally why we have doctors and scanners and blood tests and urine tests and DEXA scans and all the other shit we
You can tell if somebody's fat. I'm just going to say it.
rely on, so that doctors can try to see what's actually happening in our bodies, because turns out it's really complex. And while we all fight each other over whether or not we're healthy enough to deserve empathy...
We can tell if somebody's over or underweight. Most people can tell. It's literally hardwired into our brains. We can tell.
or food stamps. Meanwhile, Elon Musk has made $10 million in the time it's taken you to watch this video. You may think it's not that deep, but it so fucking is, okay? So what do we do about this?
On a vacation rental, if it's not...
1 second. Okay.
Challenge you to decenter capitalism from your life as much as possible. That's kind of a major fix for a lot of the society.
She's getting into more of her political arguments, which, again, she's a political pundit. We'll see if she touches on anything else fat related.
Borrow the thing instead of buying it. Can you make do with what you already have? Do you actually need the thing to begin with? When it comes to your body and the impossible standards being set around what is and is not the perfect health that you're supposed to be, that is being capitalized on by various industries to try to sell you shit, whether it's protein powders or greens powders.
But not food and not fast food. I'm just saying, at least be consistent. I would say don't overeat. Don't buy more food than you need, or don't waste the money on excess food. It's not healthy. It doesn't make sense. It's not a good investment. Invest the money into other things. Excess food by definition is excess. It's excessive. You don't need it. So don't waste your money on that. That is a toxic ritualistic thing. And I advocate against it, because that money spent on overeating is money wasted, period. And that's toxic ritualistic or not. Even if you're just overeating out of a sense of indulgence, it's a waste of money.
Or at-home workout equipment, or protein bars, or special weight loss programs, or weight loss drugs, or an at-home infrared sauna from Costco. Like, we are inundated.
You don't have to do all that. You can just count your calories.
Shit all fucking day, because it's our responsibility to make ourselves healthy. And if we don't, then we're bad people. So we're willing to impulse buy shit to try to make it happen. Speaking from experience, a lot of the fat phobia that has been ingrained in us, we use to self-police, to shame ourselves.
Yeah.
It doesn't work.
She probably has the issue. And I have a lot of compassion for her with that. It's awful. It just is. And I hope she can get out of it. I always hope people can get out of it. But she basically admitted it there. And again, having the issue, it doesn't make you a bad person. You can do bad things because of it, though. That can happen. Like, even enforcing it on other people, that is a bad thing to do. But it doesn't make you a bad person to have the issue. But you need to fight to get out of it. Like, there's no excuse to not. Yes, it's hard. Yes, it's horrible. All these things. I get it. I've had it at a horrible level, but it was so worth it to get out of it. It was so worth it to fight to get out of it. And living life without it, it has been such a challenge, but it has been the best thing I've ever done. It's just, I feel like everything I do now, it's with a new lease on life. It's like looking at everything outside of that lens. It's like you see everything. It makes everything new to be out of that issue. And it's worth it. It really, really is. That's all I can tell you. It is absolutely worth it. Even if it takes a while. It can take people years. It took me years. But you can get out, and it is worth it. And I hope that she gets out of it, because you don't have to hate yourself to normalize your weight. You don't have to do any of that. You don't even have to think about how you look to get to normalized weight. In fact, I advise against it, at least up to a certain point. Now I started to a little bit, but again, I've had years out of the issue. I don't have the same mental pathways that I used to. It's just different. And I've pursued beauty as a part of a spiritual journey. So there is a framework of what I'm doing that keeps me in check. And I always put health first as a part of that. But the point is, you don't have to stick with that pain. You just don't. You can let that go.
If shame worked, every fat person would be skinny as hell, okay? Because
I agree that you shouldn't shame. It just reinforces the toxic ritualistic.
Society provides enough shame to go around, and yet we have an incredibly unhealthy population. So a major step is also trying to contend with the preconceived notions you have about your own worth inside your own head. Food deserts, childhood trauma, stress, anxiety, expectations.
Toxic ritualistic mindsets and behaviors. You've got to get out. You've got to get out of it. Please get out. Don't listen to it. Don't listen to it anymore. Start to fight it. Push back against it. It's not good for you.
Of productivity from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. every day. None of this is conducive to being healthy. The food industry spends billions of dollars every year on food science that is literally specially formulated to fuck with your lizard brains so that you cannot stop eating even when you
eat those
want to.
foods.
The
You don't
system
have
is
to.
specially formulated to make you.
You don't have to eat those foods though. You can do the best you can. There are certain things that I have, they don't make me hungrier. There are certain things that used to make me hungrier that I don't now. You know, like, for example, I couldn't handle stevia. Now I can. I couldn't handle sucralose. If I had even a little tiny bit of it, it would make me really hungry when I was really big. Now I can handle it, but I don't have tons of it. Like, I do limit it. But I'm just saying, like, there are certain things that are maybe not as natural that you can handle, but you need to try to have as natural of a diet as you can, or keep nutrition in mind. You know, like, for example, I've been eating a lot of clams still as I'm climbing out of this deficit because I'm still trying to get, in particular, my iron, zinc, and copper up, and doing my best to do that through supplementation and natural foods like clams that have all of them in it. So I'm just saying, keep your nutrition in mind. Monitor what vitamins and minerals you're getting in, and you'll have a lot less of an issue and a lot less temptation with those types of foods and stuff. Typically, those foods, people are eating them for a sense of stimulation. And if you think of it that way, then you see how hollow it is. So even if you're just doing it in a sense of being overindulgent, it's not actually doing anything for you. So I wouldn't suggest it. It's just not, and it's a waste of money. So I do think that how we think about these things has to shift. You don't have to buy it. I used to eat Takis all the time. I haven't bought them in years. I don't need them. It's a choice.
Ill and then make you feel bad for being ill. And the standards of health that we are all being held to were largely made up and based off of centuries of misogyny, eugenics, and racism. That is so much to contend with. It's okay if your relationship with your health and your body varies from day to day. It's okay if you can't overcome the entire system while you're actively being oppressed by it. Health.
You need to get out of the toxic ritualistic. Fight it like hell and get out.
Looks different for different people. You are not a moral failure if you don't live up to the made-up health standards, and you deserve to feel good about yourself no matter what you look like. You do not owe anyone your health. You also deserve to have the tools.
You owe it to yourself, and you owe it to those who love you. So she's wrong. You're wrong. And, you know, and I'll just add too, if you believe in God, you owe it to God too. You do owe it to people. That is stupid. Even if it's just yourself, you owe it to yourself. So that is wrong, period.
Have agency over your own health, and that is not easy to attain the way the world is currently set up, and that fucking sucks. But you also do have some agency. This is a yes and situation. We can acknowledge the societal hurdles and bullshit and also work towards feeling better in our bodies if we do not feel healthy. Whether or not you choose to do so does not make you morally superior or inferior. However,
oh my goodness.
I personally have worked through my relationship with my body with a therapist and some EMDR sessions, which is a privilege not many people have access to. But if you do, I highly recommend unpacking the self-loathing, perfectionism, and self-policing that comes with, especially.
Self-loathing is a huge part of a toxic ritualistic cycle. And true, genuine self-love is a de-escalating force, absolutely. But I still think that she's in it, and she needs to do more work. I'll put it to you that way.
Especially being a woman in this fucking cesspool. And then I have found spite to be
The toxic ritualistic also does affect men too. It's not a gendered issue. So no, it goes all around, but it can shift within different generations, or, you know, there are different trends basically. Yeah, like two standouts that I've seen. I do think that Gen X women at a younger age, they had a particularly high amount of toxic ritualistic stuff going on. And I think we're seeing with the Gen Z men, they have higher levels than we've seen in other men too. So there can be shifts or trends, but remember, not everybody has this issue. It's not a majority of people have the issue whatsoever, but it is common enough, especially Hinge, where you'll see these types of takes in people all around, you know, but it's not everybody. It's not. So keep that in mind too. I don't want people to think like, oh my gosh, do I have it? Da, da, da. You probably don't. Unless if you're in deep denial, I'll put it to you that way, then you might be doubting that you have it. But usually people that are very severe, it's not that many people, which thank God, because otherwise, gosh, I mean, could you imagine what society would be like? But yeah, anyways, that's something that everybody's going to have to reckon with, and etc. So yeah, let's continue.
Be an incredibly motivating factor when it comes to my health.
I do think that she has it, unfortunately. I don't think it's as severe. Maybe it used to be more severe. I perceive it as more mild in her, but I still think she has it.
Like, I do it for me too, but learning about how the BMI scale was just invented.
It can be harder sometimes when it's mild, because you don't have that moment of I have to get out or I'm going to die. That's the only way that I stopped, which is horrible to say. And it used to terrify me as an activist. I used to be like, oh my God, like, but I've just realized that I'm a particularly stubborn person. And thank God that most people are not as stubborn as me. So a lot of you guys are doing great. I'll put it to you that way. So, and that makes me really happy. Because I will always advocate to not be like I was. You know, I would go all the way. You know, I went to the bottom. I went all the way. I went as far as I could. And then it was like, I have to stop now. So, yeah.
Invented by some dude and was never meant to be an individual indicator of anything. Learning about how racism and sexism shapes how society places worth on individuals based on body
Toxic ritualistic reinforcement. This is just a bunch of hogwash.
type. Learning about how white nationalism benefits from enforcing gender norms wherein women should be small but not so small because we have to be healthy because we must bear the Aryan children. All of that I find really inspiring, to never have children and instead spend my life figuring out how to be able to deadlift a small vehicle. You know what I mean? I also have hypermobility and experience joint pain no matter what my weight is. So I'm on a mission to figure out how much muscle it takes to no longer experience joint pain, which may not be within my control, but also makes me acutely.
You do the best that you can, but you still need to get rid of all these crazy beliefs, which there are a lot. A lot of what she's saying is not real when it comes to the issue of fatness. So you need to get rid of that. As far as your political beliefs, like I said, everybody's entitled to their political beliefs. Everybody's entitled to if you want to have a kid or not, that kind of thing. Like, I don't have anything to say about that. But what I have to say is there are certain views that you have about fatness that are not realistic, that are not rooted in reality.
Aware of the aging process and concerned with having mobility well into my old age. So I try to extend myself empathy while also maintaining a sense of hope and agency over what I can control and my own wellness, and over feeling good in my body while maintaining realistic expectations and not buying into the unrealistic standards for health or thinness. And that's a lot to juggle, and I often really struggle with all of that. But doing that work inside of yourself means that you will also be less likely to extend that judgment to other people.
I think you have a lot of work to do. I'm just going to say it. People can think that that's bitchy, but I don't mean it in a bitchy way. I'm telling you because I want you to do it. I want you to get over it. I want everybody to get over it. And I don't think she's over it. I don't. There's still a lot left.
With things that are not apparent just by looking at them. And once again, we come back to empathy and community as an antidote to the fascist hellhole that is currently engulfed this stupid country. Become ungovernable by showing empathy to yourself and your neighbors, because that's radical. Also, feel free to drop in the comments all the reasons why you don't agree with me, because this subject really gets people...
Well, I did a whole reaction, and quite a long one at that, and I'm just going to do it.
...riled up, and I can't wait to hear what you guys have to say. And if you'd like to support my work, consider joining here on YouTube by clicking the big join button below, or supporting me over on Patreon, patreon.com/Legia Miller, where you get access to all these episodes completely ad-free. Thank you to my multi-platform...
That's everything. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I enjoy it. Obviously, I love this work, but I hope that she does get out of it completely. Like, we want a complete recovery, period. That is what I advocate for on this channel. I feel like she is addressing it somewhat, but it's not gone. And I want that to be known. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys another day. Peace.